Moving right along into the transfer portal, Jordan. It is officially transfer portal season in college football. If all of you haven't already noticed by the multiple names all over the transfer portal, by pretty much every team in college football has had someone, at least one, enter the transfer portal so far this season, including playoff teams, and Clemson has not been immune to that. We actually had a guy enter before the ACC championship game, so. Going over some of Clemson's transfers so far this season, or guys intending to transfer. Former four-star Troy Stellato is entering the transfer portal. Former four-star Sherrod Koval entering the transfer portal, and former three-star Noble Johnson entering the transfer portal. So two wide receivers there, and Troy Stellato and Noble Johnson, and then safety Sherrod Koval. Troy Stellato and Noble Johnson got multiple years of eligibility. Sherrod Cobal's got 1 year left, so he's looking for more playing time, as are all of these guys. So, thoughts on the guys that have entered the transfer portal so far, Jordan? Did any of it surprise you? And what effect do you think it has on this Clemson Tigers team?
Yeah, I mean, well, we've already talked about Troy Stellato. Obviously, the two most recent ones being Sherrod Koval and Noble Johnson. I think the writing was on the wall, honestly, with all three of them. But I think these two as well, these most recent ones, with Noble, he's a guy that came in, had a lot to learn from a fundamental standpoint when he got to Clemson, and he had some maturing to do, and obviously he's had some less than ideal things happen to him while he's been at Clemson, and so it kind of put him behind the eight ball. He's coming back from an injury this season, at the beginning of this season, and so when you have two true freshmen, 5-star wide receivers come in and they're as good as they were, it felt like this was a conclusion that was inevitable. And I think, I wish him the best, because I do think he has some, he does have talent. He comes from a really, really talented part of the state of Texas, and he had really, really good high school tape. So I'm interested to see where he ends up, but I felt like this was kind of a situation that we kind of all felt was going to happen. And then with Sherrod Koval, again, when you didn't see him play much the last few weeks, you were like, okay, well, that seems to be saying a lot, especially it was kind of strange because, towards the middle of the year, he played his career high in snaps. I believe it was, who was it against? Was it against Virginia? I don't remember. Sometime mid-season. Can't remember.
I think it was Virginia. I want to say it was Virginia.
It might have been. I'll have to go and look. But, he's a guy that just since he's been at Clemson, he's never quite been able to crack and play and be one of the top guys, in the defensive backfield. He's had moments and spots where he's played, and obviously he's had a couple of injuries at different points in his career. But a guy I had a lot of hope for, just with his aggressiveness, his downfield. Like coming out of high school, he was one of the hardest hitting players I had seen Clemson recruit in a long time. But I just it kind of felt like with how things were trending and the fact that his snaps were declining from the the middle of the season to this back half. It felt like, okay, well, that's probably a guy we need to keep an eye out for. And so
we started against Florida State.
That's right. Okay, it was Florida State.
Florida State.
I knew it was some point early in this earlier in the season, but
Yeah.
you know, so I mean, with all three of these guys, there were very obvious reasons why they entered, and I think they will get better opportunities elsewhere. So far, no surprises, nothing that severely impacts you. Well, other than I think Troy obviously being the most, probably the biggest in
Yeah.
terms of just production and depth. But again, none of these three should really surprise anybody.
Yeah, no, I don't. None of them surprised me. I knew that we would probably be losing multiple receivers come the end of this season. The writing was kind of on the wall. I think Noble Johnson makes a lot of sense, and the reason that he's transferring, and maybe for him, he's obviously you mentioned that he came in and he needed to be developed. He needed to develop some technique and some maturity and things like that. And he certainly had his issues at Clemson so far, although I think he's recovered nicely from that and done what he needed to do. But you can't blame the guy for seeing the writing on the wall and the depth in the wide receiver room and wanting to move on. And the same thing with the Troy Stellato. I think he's obviously, from what Dabo said, he's looking to be a number one or number two guy on a roster, and that's certainly not going to happen on this Clemson roster, how it's currently constructed. His role was kind of what his role is currently was going to be his role going forward, right? He wasn't going to crack that one or two um, wide receiver on the depth chart. It just wasn't going to happen. So he's got 2 years left of eligibility. He's going to look for an opportunity where he can be the guy or the second best guy on a roster. So wish him the best with that. Same with Sherrod Coble. He looked like he had so much promise early on in his career at Clemson, and then the injury, and maybe hasn't quite looked the same since coming back from injury, and part of that is probably being passed on the depth chart by other guys, younger guys, and you can't blame guys for like that have put in the work and unfortunately had injuries, and they're going to move on to another opportunity where hopefully they get more playing time. So I don't think any of these three are really particularly surprising. And, I think there's minimal impact to the current roster that we have. You mentioned Troy Stellato being the most notable one, but, I think we got guys that can slide in and take up that slack. But, kind of turning the page from who's leaving Clemson and talking a little bit about the transfer portal and Clemson, something that the media loves to talk about. Anytime Clemson is mentioned, the media loves to mention that, Clemson is the only school other than the service academies to not have a single start from a transfer portal person all season. They love to put that graphic up. Everybody loves to talk about how Dabo Swinney doesn't like the transfer portal and so on and so forth. But let's talk about the possibility of Clemson utilizing the transfer portal this coming off season. What do we think the odds are of that? And then if they do, what position groups would they possibly look at? First things that come to mind for me is maybe a running back, maybe edge position would certainly be a point of emphasis if you were to go to the portal. What are your thoughts on Clemson in the portal this offseason?
Yeah, I think when Clemson fans hear the words transfer portal in relation to Clemson and using it, I think it's always kind of a, especially now, I think it's kind of a, well, I'll believe it when I see it. Just seems like a
100%.
fantasy right now. But you know, between the reports, Clemson has been evaluating its options and has been actively, perusing the portal. How deep they've gotten into conversations with certain guys. I know some Clemson has been connected to a couple of names. I don't know how serious those have gotten. So until names truly actually surface that Clemson has extended an offer to, I'm I'm not even going to spend a whole lot of time on this show talking about it. Yeah, because I think you and I are just kind of in the same boat of, well, we'll believe it when we see it. But um, there does seem to be a bit more of a concerted effort to truly evaluate the portal
Yeah.
and have the funds necessary to actually land guys. I think that was one of the things that killed you last year. I mean, when you went after a couple of offensive linemen, you didn't bring them home because you weren't uh, offering competitive deals. So that was pretty. I mean, so that's been a focus of this. Uh, this offseason in terms of Clemson and getting their NIL and their NIL sort of situation more in line, because that just was not working the way it was currently set up.
Right.
But in terms of like position groups they could go after, I mean, I think most pressing and most obvious this season has been Clemson's lack of pass rush for a lot of the year.
Yeah.
Obviously TJ Parker individually had an outstanding season. He's 11 sacks, multiple forced fumbles, one of the best defensive ends in the country. But you just have not had, the consistent pass rush that Clemson defenses of old were, known for. Clemson has been pretty middle of the road in the country in terms of pressure rate and a lot of the advanced statistics when it comes to that. And that's just, I mean, with the talent that you have on your defensive line, that's just that can't happen. And the fact that you had to move your all-world defensive tackle to defensive end says a lot about how you felt about your defensive end depth. So I think getting a capable, not just a capable, but a higher end defensive end in the transfer portal, I think is something that Clemson should be seriously evaluating. I think they are seriously evaluating. I think that's where I would start, because I think that's where I think this you need the most help. Because you're not. I don't expect anyone in this freshman class to really come in and step in and be that guy right away. As talented as like a guy like Ari Watford is, I don't expect him to be that day one on campus. I think he's going to be more of a project. He's smaller. I don't think Clemson wants to be bigger up front. I think getting preferably a guy that's started multiple years, on the and definitely more physically developed, I think would be the way to go. I think you could go and it wouldn't hurt to get a linebacker. I think it's going to be hard to convince a linebacker in the portal to come and play with potentially Sammy Brown and Wade Woodaz coming back.
Right.
But obviously the depth of this season has been pretty questionable.
It's been an issue for sure.
Yeah, and especially with Kobe McLeod tearing his ACL early in the season.
Yeah.
You have not. It's clear you don't trust the guys behind it. D. Creighton, Jamal Anderson, like they barely saw the field. So that tells you a lot.
Right.
Similar with the running back position, it tells you a lot about how they feel about depth at that position.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta wonder that, what are the issues, at the running back position and at the depth of the linebacker position. Clearly, they don't trust any of those guys because, they roll out guys that are far less than 100% to take, all the bulk of the snaps, the meaningful snaps. So, it certainly leaves the door open for, should you take a look at a running back in the portal? Should you take a look at a linebacker in the portal? And I 1,000% think that Clemson should take an edge guy in the portal.
Yeah.
Peter Woods, although he was okay out on the edge at times, he struggled with some injuries, but that's not his position. He's a defensive tackle through and through. He needs to be moved back to the interior of the defensive line, which is what they have done of late with Peter Woods, because that's where he's best served. And you need to go get a guy that's going to be opposite TJ Parker, that can take some pressure off of him, so that they both can feast along that edge of that Clemson front. Because the defensive tackle position is still going to be really good next year and still really deep. So adding a playmaker at the edge position, I think could really go a long way for Clemson in changing this defense for the better.
100%. So, yeah, I think those should be the three positions that they look at heavily. I think they could potentially look at offensive line for depth, but that's always kind of spotty. And of course, it depends on who you bring back and all of that. But
right.
Yeah, I think defensive end should be the number one priority, because the lack of pass rush this year has been, that was pretty shocking at, just how little you were getting to the quarterback at times, especially early in the year. It's gotten better over the last, few weeks. But, especially with moving Peter Woods back inside, definitely played a part in that. And TJ Parker just, flat out taking over games
Feasting
at times.
Feasting over there.
Yeah. But that can't be you need to have a complete, deep, edge room.
Yeah.
If you don't have those guys on the field, it feels like you don't really have much of a pass rush. So
absolutely, completely agree. Will Clemson go to the portal? Really, none of us know. Obviously, there's one glaring position of need, I think, for the Tigers, and that's the edge position. There's a couple other places where Clemson could look to add a playmaker or two. But to your point, I hope Clemson has learned their lesson from last year and pursuing some of those offensive linemen. And I hope they take, if they're going to seriously look at the portal and look at adding some talent through that portal, I hope they learn their lesson from last year, and that you have to be quick. You got to be aggressive. You got to have a clear plan laid out for these guys, and you got to have a legitimate offer for them if you hope to land any of the big talent that is going to be in the transfer portal. So we'll see how the Clemson Tigers handle that. To be determined. I'm with most of the Clemson fans when we say I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
But I think they should, at least at the defensive end position. At least there.
Yeah.
If we're only going to take one, take a defensive end.